Hello, hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to learn about Detekt and GitHub Actions. We will first understand what is Detekt and what is static code analysis, and then we will understand the basics about GitHub Actions. And finally, we will integrate both of these together such that whenever we create a new pull request against the main branch, GitHub Actions run first and performs the Detekt job. So let's get straight into it and understand first what is Detekt and what is static code analysis. Before we actually start working with Detekt, we first need to understand what is static code analysis. So static code analysis is nothing but the analysis of the code of the program that you have written to make sure that our code is reliable and secure. To give you a better example of this, it's an unwritten rule that a single file shouldn't have large number of lines of code, right? And let's say my organization decides that any of the file in the project shouldn't have more than 100 lines of code, as well as a particular method or any method in the entire project shouldn't have more than 5 parameters. Now this is the standard that my organization has come up with. Now how can we check for each of the files or each of the lines of code that we have written whether these set of rules are being followed or not? We can do this manually when we are doing the PR reviews, but it is tedious and is prone to errors. So in order to fix this, in order to automate this, there are a lot of libraries which help us to do the static code analysis out of the box. One such library for Kotlin is Detekt. So this is the library which basically does the static code analysis for Kotlin. It helps us to make sure that we are maintaining the standard of quality and we are following all the steps to make our code reliable and secure. So what is this is basically it has some pre-written, or I would say some default set of rules that is already there. And what it does is that once we run the command, it goes through the entire project and check whether all those rules are being followed or not. And if we are not following those rules, it throws an error with regards to the rule that is not being followed. Let us go into the docs, and here we will see that there is something called rules documentation which defines all the rule set. And for example, let's take up this formatting rule set. So here you will see that by default the indent size should be 4. So this is a rule that is applied automatically when we are using Detekt to do the static code analysis. So in the entire project, if there is any place where we are having more than 4 indent size, it will throw an error saying that the indent size is not correct. Similarly, max line length. So you can see for the Android, the default is 100. And if we are exceeding that, it will throw an error. Similar to this, there are a lot of rules with respect to formatting, exception, coroutines, a lot of things are there. So what we will do now is we will create an Android application. We will add the dependencies for Detekt, and we will run the command to check whether our project is following all the rule set that is defined over here or not. So now what I have done here is that I have just created a new project. I have named it as Detekt GitHub Actions. I have not made any change to the project as of now. We're not going to work on the UI as such, so we don't need to create any composables or anything like that. We can keep it as it is. You can even close this if you want. What we want to do here is we want to add the dependencies or the plugins that is required for Detekt to work. Okay, so let us do that. So let us open Gradle script, open the build Gradle at the project level. We will add this plugin over here, and then inside the build Gradle at the app level, we are going to add this. Okay, once you've added the plugins, let's sync the project, let's sync the Gradle. So once the Gradle is synced, the next thing we can do here is to perform the actual code analysis using Detekt. So for doing that, we have to run a Gradle command. So we will open the Gradle tab, go to the Gradle task window and look for this app detect command. And once we run this command, it should throw up errors, right? It should throw up errors. So we will see that we are getting these errors. This is the path where the error is, and this is the actual error. Like function name should match the pattern, expression should contain, like expression contains a magic number and things like that. Now, why we are getting this error? So we are getting this error because at the time of creation of the project, as in when the main activity was created and all these files were created, we weren't following the set rules of Detekt, right? It was automatically created and therefore these rules weren't followed at that time. Basically, Google doesn't follow the Detekt set rules for static code analysis. They might be having their own, but right now we are using the Detekt library and we are following the set rules as mentioned in that particular library. So because of that, we are getting these errors. Okay. Also, let's say you want to have a document where all these errors are listed down. So you can actually find that if you go to the project structure, if you go to app build, there is this new folder that is created called reports, detect, and inside this you will see there is something called detect.xml. So this is the file where you will see all the errors. So it will have the file path and the line column number, severity, and the message of the error. You can even configure Detekt to create this report in the HTML format also. Okay, you can just simply Google it and there is a small command that is to be placed in the build Gradle file and it will create it in the HTML format also. Now let's say, as I talked earlier, that these are the errors that is showing up because we weren't following Detekt from the starting, as all these files were created automatically, right? So let's say now we want to suppress these errors because it was already there, right? And from this point on, we decide that we will follow all the set rules, and if there are any errors from now this point on, it should come up, right? So in order to suppress these errors, what we need to do is we need to create something called a baseline. So what is baseline is? Baseline is basically a file which will have all this file path name along with the line number with the respective errors and everything recorded inside it. And the next time you do the detect command, it will skip those lines and it won't show up as errors in the terminal. And when this is useful is when we are not using Detekt library from the beginning itself. That is, we are not following these set rules from the beginning itself. For example, if you add Detekt to your ongoing project, there will be the scenario that you will get all these errors, right? You can either try to rectify those errors or you can create this or you can use those errors as a baseline, and moving forward, any if there are any errors that comes up, it will show up in the terminal. Okay, so now to create that baseline file, what we have to do is, again we have to go to Gradle, open the Gradle task command, and we have to search for baseline. So you will get this app detect baseline. Now let us run this command. Okay, so what it does is, if we open project, we will see this file that is created, which is called detect-baseline. Basically, it records all the errors that is there in the project at this point of time, so that the next time we are getting, and the next time we are running the detect command, it will skip these errors and look for the newer ones only. Okay. So after we have run the baseline command, if we try to run the detect command again, this time the errors won't show up. Let's see that. Okay. So let us make sure we are calling the app detect command and let us run that command. So you can see this time it was successful and there was no errors. Why? Because we created the baseline file and the detect command while doing the static analysis skipped all those errors. So now let's say if we add any error to our project, it will show up. So for example, if we go to main activity and inside the main activity, let us try to create an error scenario. Okay. So I know that there is a set rule that a single line shouldn't have, if I remember correctly, more than 100 characters or something like that, right? So what we will do is we will add everything in a single line. Okay. So let us see this. So we have added everything in a single line right now. Now if we try to run the detect command again, it should throw me an error, but just this error, not the previous ones, because we have mentioned those errors in the baseline and the detect would skip those errors. Okay, so let us run the detect command again, and as you can see, it has like one weighted issue, and if we look for that, it is this one. It says line detected, which is longer than the defined maximum line length in the code style, right? Now if we go to project and if we go to app build reports and detect.xml, it should have only one error, right? Earlier we saw that there were many tags, file tags with errors, but all those are gone because we have mentioned those errors in the baseline, and therefore detect skips it and it doesn't report it. But since we got this error, which is a newer error that was not there in the baseline, it will show up in this report file. Now after this, what we can also do is we can change the rule set according to our need too. For example, our organization decides that the max number of characters in a line should not be 120, but it should be 220, right? So how we will do that? So what we can do is we can generate a config file for Detekt and make the changes inside it. Now to generate the config file, what we have to do is again we will go to the graded task and we will look for this particular command, which is app detect generate config. Now if we run this, it will basically create this detect.yml file. Okay, and where you can find this, it is there inside project structure. You will see this particular folder called config, and this is the detect.yml file. Okay, here we have all the different rule sets mentioned. Okay, this is the default rule set. Since we have not changed anything, this is the default rule set. Even you can have your own custom build YAML file, and you can point the grader to read that particular file. In the gradle, you can add a command to read that particular file. But what we are going to do is we are going to make the change inside this and see if detect picks up that particular change and works accordingly or not. So what we want is we want to change the max line length, so which is basically this. As you can see, it is 120. This basically means that the maximum length of a line is 120 characters. Let's change it to 220. Let's change it to 220. So now what should happen is that this shouldn't give error now, right? This line shouldn't give the error now because we have updated the rule set that the max line length is not 120 but 220. Now if we try to run the command, which is detect, it shouldn't throw up error. As you can see, it didn't throw the error. Okay, so for now we have learned how to run the detect command, how to do the baseline file, how to create the baseline file, and how to update the default detect rule set. Just a small note that detect acts as a wrapper on kt-lint, so it also does the lint check too, right? But in our current project, what we want to do is we want to run this detect command on GitHub using GitHub Actions. And when we want to do that is when we are creating a PR against the main branch. Okay, that is when we want to do this. But first, what we need to understand is what is GitHub Actions. Okay, so up till this point, we have learned the basics of Detekt library. There are a lot of things you can do inside it. There are a lot of configurations, as you must have understood. There are a lot of possibilities and a lot of things that you can do with this particular library. But to give you a basic understanding, I will stop up till this point. But if you have any certain case or certain scenario, do comment in the comment section below, and I will try to resolve those queries. But now let's learn what is GitHub Actions. Let's understand the basic of that, and then we will try to integrate Detekt using GitHub Actions when we are creating the PR. Okay, so let's learn GitHub Actions now. So let us understand what is GitHub Actions first. GitHub Actions is basically a feature provided by GitHub which help us to create some CI/CD pipelines. And what I mean by CI/CD pipeline here is that it helps us to create certain tasks and jobs which help us to automate the integration and deployment of our applications. So let's consider this scenario that you are working on a certain feature and you have created a branch of it and you want to merge it, right? So you create the PR for that against the main branch. And let's say once you have created the PR, there are certain things that needs to be first verified before actually deploying it, right? So there has to be the tests that should be working fine, the logic should be working fine. There has to be all the checks like the linting check, the static analysis check, everything should be fine. And only then the APK should be built up and let's say it should be deployed, or let's say it should be provided to the QA on Slack for testing, right? So there are multiple steps that is there after actually you have written your code and you have provided the feature branch of it. Okay. Now we can do all these things manually, but instead of doing this manually, it would be better that all these steps happens automatically, right? Automatically performs all the tests with regards to a particular feature. Then it checks for all the linting errors, all the static code analysis, and then automatically builds the APK and even provides the APK to a certain Slack channel, right? So here this particular operation that is happening automatically, where it is performing all the tests and checks and even deploying it to a certain platform, is mainly termed as the CI/CD automation, or creating basically the CI/CD pipeline. And GitHub Actions help us to do that. Okay. So how it helps us to do this is basically it helps us to create workflows, and each of the workflows can have multiple jobs. What I mean by workflows here is, as in my previous example, as I said, that there can be multiple tests related to that particular feature or a particular application that needs to be checked and verified if your feature is working perfectly for all the tests. Then there is another step where we are checking if all the linting errors and static code analysis, everything is fine, and then we are finally building it. So that there are three different steps, right? So these three steps can be termed as three different workflows, and each of these workflows can have multiple jobs. Like in case of errors, there can be a job for checking for linting, and then can be a job for checking for the static code analysis. Okay. So something like this. So what should happen here is, let's say you have created a branch and you have creating a PR. As soon as you create your PR, all these three different workflows should automatically be triggered, and they will check if it is fine or not, and everything is fine. And this is how the actual configuration file for the GitHub Actions look like. Okay. So we will be creating something similar to this, where what we want to do here is, whenever we create a PR against the main branch, it should automatically trigger a workflow where we will be creating a job that would run the detect command, and it would check if everything is fine or not. So I've already created a GitHub repo and pushed my code on that particular repo. It is something like this. Now we will create the YAML file and we provide all the configurations and everything, but there is one thing that we need to understand, that even though we are providing the workflows to be triggered as soon as the PR is created, it wouldn't prevent from merging the PR request. Okay, it is just a helping tool that allows you to perform certain actions before you are actually merging the PR. Okay, so it wouldn't disable the button or anything like that. It would just help the reviewer to be sure that the code that is getting merged is correct and it is free from any errors or any bugs as such. Okay, that is the goal here. So it wouldn't prevent from actually merging it directly. It would just help the PR reviewer to be sure that whatever the code is getting merged has been tested thoroughly and is error free. Okay, so let us create the configuration file for the GitHub action such that as soon as we create the PR request for the main branch, it automatically triggers the detect workflow. Okay, so for doing that, we will open the project structure, and inside the app itself, we will create a new directory. We will call it as .github, and inside .github, we will create another directory. We will call it as workflows. So inside workflows, we will provide all the different workflows that we want for our repo. Okay, so there can be a workflow for testing, but one workflow for building, one workflow for like tests or anything like that. Okay? in this particular example, we are just going to create one workflow and we will check if that particular workflow is getting triggered or not. So inside this, we create simply a file. You can name it anything. I'm just naming it as detect actions.yml. Okay. Now what we have to do here is we have to name this particular workflow. So I'm going to name it as detect actions, and after that we need to provide a trigger for this particular workflow. So we will write on pull request and we'll provide the branches. You can provide multiple branches also. I'm just providing one. And then we will provide the jobs that needs to be run inside this particular workflow. So we'll write jobs and we will name the job as detect, and we will provide the environment. So our environment would be Ubuntu, the latest version, and then we need to provide the steps. Okay, so what would be the steps here is that we need to provide the certain steps that needs to be performed inside this particular job. So for the first step is simple, that is we need to first of all check out our code to this particular environment, that is basically clone our code to the Ubuntu environment. Okay, so first of all we just name it. We'll name it as checkout code, and we will use a command called actions checkout @v3. Okay. The next thing is we are going to set up JDK using a command which is actions/setup java @v3, and we need to provide a distribution for this as well as version. So we will write distribution because there are multiple distributors for Java, so we will write as Oracle and the Java version as 17. Okay. So after this, what we need to do here is we need to provide the permission for actually running the graded w command. Okay, so by default Linux doesn't has the permission to trigger or run the graded w command, so we will create a step for that. So we will write grant execute permission for graded w, and what we will do here is we will just run a simple command which is chmod x graded w, so that we provide all the necessary permissions to the graded w command, and then finally we will actually build and run the detect command. So we will just simply write the command for that, which is graded w detect. Okay, so we have named the workflow, we have provided the trigger, we have provided the environment, we cloned the code to the environment, set up the JDK, not JSK, JDK, provided the permission for the graded w command, and then we are finally just triggering the detect command. Okay, so now we will just simply push this code, and then we will create a different branch with some small changes, and we will push that branch and create a PR against the main branch and check if the workflow is triggering or not. So we will just simply push this and we will just write a commit with YAML file. Okay. So as you can see that the new commit is already pushed and it is visible over here, commit with YAML file. The next thing that we want to do now is we will create a different branch, make some small change, and then push that branch and create a PR against the main branch and check if the detect workflow is getting triggered or not. So let us create a different branch. First of all, I'm going to call it as test branch. Okay. And we'll just make some small change to our code in order to create the PR. So we'll go to main activity and just simply let's do this small change, something like this, and we will push this change. So we will just write committing for testing. Okay, and we will push this branch with this small change. So it is already pushed. Now if we open up GitHub and let me just refresh the page, go to PR, and click on new pull request. You can see there is a test branch available. We can create a pull request for this. So let's create a pull request. So now what should happen here is, like, within few seconds there should be, yeah, this particular information that are some checks that haven't completed yet, and this is the name that we provided for our GitHub workflow. If you remember, Detekt Actions, and if you click on details, it should basically open up the different jobs that are running inside this particular workflow. So setup job is completed, checkout code is completed, setup JDK is completed, and the permission for GitHub is also completed. Now the main step, that is actually running the detect command, is in progress. So now we have to wait for some time for it to build and run the detect command, because it is happening on the cloud, and for the very first time it takes some time to perform the Gradle action. So let us wait and see what happens. We can see that all the steps are completed without any errors, and in case there was any error, it would have given a different symbol, and so that means that our workflow ran successfully. And if I go back to the pull request, now we will see this particular status, that all checks have passed, and therefore the reviewer would be sure that the detect has run and there are no issues related to detect, and he or she can easily just merge the pull request. Similarly, as a next step, what you can do here is that you can add multiple jobs or multiple workflows for different things, like one for building the APK, one for even just running the test cases. So what you can also do as the next step is that you can write the test cases in your application, configure the workflow such that once the detect check is completed, it would trigger the next workflow, which would basically be the testing workflow, and it would just simply run the unit test class, and it will check if all the test cases are passing or not, and that would also add as a second check over here. So that is pretty much it for this particular video. If you found this video useful, do like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.